The mysterious hills. Have you heard about the sliding hills? Our legends about them spread from mouth to mouth and are infamous in my country. Some people say that they are nuclear missile storage facilities. Some people simply say that they are just military bases. But I know the truth, the real truth about them that no other sap in Russia knows. I forgot to introduce myself. I will not tell you my name, and you do not need it. Giving up my name will be like giving up my life freely to these people. It is important to know my age. I was born in the year 1967 in the Far East. After being drafted into the army, I became a truck driver. One of the sergeants noticed my good driving skills, and on his advice, I was transferred to one of the secret units deep in the taiga. Do not worry, none of this information will be enough to identify me. Even if it somehow is, I have taken other precautions. At first, everything was just fine. I was just transporting soldiers and cargo to a unit that at first glance did not differ from the one that I was originally called up to. After doing this for a while, a natural question arose inside my head. Why would we be delivering such a great distance from any kind of civilization? This was so far out. But this did not bother me, and I lived my usual soldier's life in the taiga. Sometimes I drove someone, but more often I serviced the transport and waved off annoying taiga mosquitoes. A couple of months later, we were forced to transport some cargo even deeper into the taiga. We were driving in a column of 5 cars along a barely visible road. We arrived very early, and by that time, it was already dusk. It was incredibly hard to say, but we stopped at a small checkpoint where 3 to 4 soldiers were unloading our cars. After unloading, we just turned around and drove away. It seemed really strange to me back then, and I could not help but wonder again. Why is this building here? Why is this checkpoint here? If there is nothing else nearby, only an ancient forest and ancient hills, what could possibly be out here that is so important and that required so much cargo and personnel? A couple of more months passed. We were no longer told to transport cargo there. I was just a regular driver. The service was easy. I spent almost all of my time working on cars. But one thought did not leave me. Why transport so much cargo to nowhere? For what purpose did we go there? With these thoughts, I went to bed almost every night. One day, in the middle of a restless sleep, I was woken up by that same sergeant. "Come with me, soldier," is all he said to me. We came to his office immediately. He asked me if I remembered that road to nowhere and that small building in the middle of the trees, and if I would like to change my place of service. And now I'm on my way there. I don't remember exactly why I accepted the offer. Probably because it's hard to say no to people like him. And of course, it's partially to satisfy my own curiosity. I guess I've become obsessed with that place over the last couple of months. It's always cold here. I distinctly remember the rain running down my cheeks. I can still feel that same coldness while writing this out for you all. And now I'm in that small building, filling out paperwork. Everything here is much more secret than in your previous unit. Remember that. Just do your job and don't ask any unnecessary questions. That's what I was told. My new task is to carry cargo to the LCIL 319, Lenin Research Center 319. At that time, I still did not understand what could be studied in such a remote place. The habits of brown bears, or maybe studying the indigenous peoples of this place. And so we leave the checkpoint. I was surprised, because over the past couple of months, I have imagined a lot, and the most logical option seemed to me to be where there is some secret bunker under the building, and I will need to service it. But everything happened much differently than what I expected. We went up to the hill. After a while, the escort stopped me in my tracks. Once we had stopped, they took out a radio and muttered something into it. There was a distinct grinding and rumbling sound coming from somewhere. It sounded as if someone ancient was looking for a way out of captivity. At first, I thought that an earthquake had started. Right in front of my nose, literally 5 meters away from me, the earth was moving apart. I don't even know what this could be compared to in my everyday life. It was as if the gates of a huge hangar had moved apart, and there in front of me was a massive descent down. A small elevator and a slightly inclined 2-lane road were there, and from the marks left on it, there are clear signs of heavy use. It looks to have been used often, and very recently too. All I was told was to have a nice trip. The person who gave me the papers to sign was the one who said this to me. I got into the elevator and rode for a couple of minutes. Concrete, lots of concrete, all the way down, everything just made of concrete. Lots of white daylight from the lamps on the ceiling, which is about 4 meters high. It is unclear why it is so high. Questions like when it was built, why, and how they delivered so much concrete to such a remote place pop into my head. It looked a lot like an underground city. A long road ahead designed for cars, doors in the walls without any identifying marks. I remember old documentaries about ancient people who chiseled their houses out of the rocks. They drove up to me in a small car. They explained very clearly that I could not ask questions and that my job was to just carry cargo. They took me up to one of the doors. There was a small room with a lamp, a stack of books, a door to the bathroom, and a bed. I sat down, perplexed. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. It was a man in a white coat and a mask that brought me some food. I remember that my sleep that night was restless. I dreamed of some mechanisms, gears, all sorts of weird and alien machinery that made no sense to me at all. For some reason, the machinery in my dreams seemed to be alive. The next day there was a knock on my door again. They had come to take the cargo out of the complex. They took me in a small car to a truck, sat some worker down with me, and told me to take everything to the taiga. It took us a long time to get out from the underground complex by car, at least half an hour by my estimates, but maybe a little longer. I was afraid that if I stopped, we would just roll all the way down. When we got to the exit, I saw the process of opening the passage from the inside. There were giant rods that pulled these gates straight into the ground. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. I was fascinated. Finally, we had arrived. I asked where I should take the cargo to. I was just told to put the cargo in the same place as the others. I just gave him a confused look, as I had never been the one to personally store it before. He saw my confused look and asked me if I was new to this. He explained to me where to go approximately. It turns out that the road that goes from part to here continues further. I felt really uneasy for some reason. He told me to stop after about 15 minutes of driving. He told me to turn on my next right and then turn the vehicle around. After that, he told me to get out and just follow him. I did as he asked and got out of the cabin. I would like to erase the next episode from my memory. He was already unloading everything from the truck. A glass box, framed with iron plates. Inside was a cloudy, greenish-gray liquid. Then I saw it. It was a face. There was a human face in there. Then I saw arms and legs, and then some wires going to the head of whoever it was. And on the back of the head, there was some kind of foreign metal, like an iron object, where this wire is connected. He told me to just pick it up and help him to transport it. We grabbed this box and carried it somewhere into the thicket. On the way, I tried to make out the body in the box. It was all covered in abrasions, and traces of surgical intervention were clearly visible. He told me to stop suddenly. I stood still. A deep hole appeared in front of us, the bottom of which was not visible. He told me we needed to throw it in here. I am a soldier. I cannot disobey an order, no matter how wrong it feels. That is how we were taught. We threw the box down there. The sound of glass smashing was heard when it landed. Apparently, there were already many such boxes already in there that it must have struck when we threw it down. All of a sudden, I heard a sharp scream coming from the box pit. He looked directly at me and shot me a look. He told me not to ask any unnecessary questions and to just do my job. We worked like this for an hour. Piles of bodies. piles of screams as they landed at the bottom of a deep, cold hole. Every abandoned container with a body literally screamed. Maybe it was all just in my head. That's what I hope, at least. So I lived like that for a whole week, taking out who knows who in these boxes, taking them out to who knows where and for what reason, I have no idea. I mean, I'm sure I can think of one, but not one that explains everything. Certainly not one that explains the boxes. A week of endless pain, madness, and suffering. Although my partner looked cheerful. It looked like throwing out mutilated bodies was a routine for him. The gears in my dream were spinning faster and faster every time I slept. I had a nervous breakdown. I could not take it in anymore. The harshness of the work had finally taken its toll on me. A doctor came into my half-empty concrete room. He examined me and left silently. 10 minutes later, they came for me. A large man in a white coat, a gauze bandage on his face, and an obvious desire to talk came in. You were never here. You never saw anything. You had a nervous breakdown while serving in your unit. Everyone will confirm this. Never tell anyone about this place. That is all that was said. I never got the chance to say a word or to plead my case. I got into the car. They took me to the elevator. I went outside. The last time I saw these giant doors, they looked as if they were hiding something hidden, evil, and something that should never leave the complex. I wish I had been wrong. Then I got to my unit, then to a military hospital, and then finally to a psychiatric department for a full assessment. I guess they wanted to gauge whether I could be trusted or whether I needed to be dealt with right away. It's not like anyone would believe me anyway. Maybe this assessment was just so they could discredit me and call me crazy if I ever did snap and say something. I could not sleep at night. I always had nightmares anyway, but this was even worse now. A couple of months later, I was already at home. Many years have passed. Now I'm a little over 50 years old. For many years, I tried to understand what it was. Who were these people? What kind of experiments were they conducting in this godforsaken place? I still don't understand. I don't know what the boxes were for. I don't know what the metal was for. Now I'm alone. I couldn't get close to anyone. I have no comrades at all. If I tried to tell someone about it, they either did not understand me and changed the subject, or avoided me completely altogether. Now there's only me and my strange creepy dreams. The Allagash abductions. The following narrative details a multiple alien abduction that transpired in the state of Maine during August 1976. The Allagash waterway abductions are an integral part of ufology and one of the definitive scenarios used for understanding the alien agenda. This case gained worldwide attention when it was dramatized in an episode of television's Unsolved Mysteries. Overview. Twin brothers, Jack and Jim Weiner, along with their friends, Chuck Rack and Charlie Faltz, became participants in an event involving a UFO sighting, missing time, and medical procedures performed by beings unknown. Not only were the four men fishing buddies, but they were all art students, having met at the Massachusetts College of Art. They set out for what should have been an uneventful, relaxing fishing trip. It was not to be. After being on the waterway for a time, the four fishermen had canoed to Eagle Lake. They had no luck there and returned to the bank. As they were beginning to get low on provisions, they decided to do a little fishing at night. To be on the safe side, they built a roaring fire on the bank to use as a landmark in case they became turned around on the lake. After a short period of time, all four of the men's attention was drawn to a large, bright light in the sky over the lake. It was much more brilliant than a star. Only a couple of 100 yards away, the UFO was hovering over a group of trees. The object began to move and change colors from red to green, then to a whitish yellow. The men were watching the object in awe, wondering what it might be. At this time, they estimated it to be about 80 feet in diameter. Charlie Faltz decided to signal it with his flashlight. At once, the UFO began to move toward them. They were being watched. The object silently made its way toward the men. They began a dash to the shore, paddling as fast as they could. A light from the object beamed down and engulfed the men in their canoe. The next thing they knew, they were back on the bank. Fultz again signaled the UFO with his flashlight, but this time it rose upward and departed from their view. Then they noticed that the large fire that they had only started a short time ago was already burned to ashes, which should have taken several hours. What had happened to them? It was obvious to the four buddies that they were missing several hours of time. Little was said between them at this time. They packed up their belongings and headed back home. As time went by, the events of that terrible night on Allagash would begin to have an effect on their lives. The first man to suffer was Jack Wellner. He began to have awful nightmares of strange beings with long necks and large heads. He could see himself being examined, while the other three men sat idly by. The strange humanoid beings in Jack's nightmares were described as having metallic-like, glowing eyes with no lids. Their hands were like an insect's, with only 4 fingers. The other 3 men also were having dreams of a similar nature. Finally, in 1988, Jim Wellner decided to visit a UFO conference, which was hosted by author Raymond Fowler. When the conference ended, he talked to Fowler and related his remarkable encounter on the Allagash waterway. Fowler was very experienced in dealing with the exact problem that Jim, his brother, and the 2 other fishermen were facing. He suggested to Jim that all 4 of the men undergo regressive hypnosis, a type of hypnosis that recovers lost memories. After the 4 men completed their sessions, it was determined that all of them had been abducted by strange beings from the UFO that engulfed them in their canoe on the Allagash waterway. Part of the abduction involved very sensitive, personal issues of the taking of fluid, semen samples, and other humiliating medical tests. The men all recalled the abduction procedure. Some would recall one part of it, and some another part, but when combined, they issued a complete picture of a typical alien abduction. Since the men were all artists, they were able to draw striking depictions of the examination room, the instruments used, and the aliens. This information will be invaluable to those who study the phenomena of alien abduction. The 4 friends would also take lie detector tests, which they all passed, further verifying their encounter. Never had any spooks happen to me, but this is definitely X-related. Let me tell you about my half-sister's fiancé. Let's call him Allan. First formally met Allan at a Thanksgiving dinner, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Looks like your typical schizotype. Greasy hair, real thin, high raspy voice, wears a trench coat and fingerless gloves. Massive conspiracy theorist. Tells everyone about chemtrails, reptilians, greys. Conventional stuff, really. He also said that World War III will be fought on World of Warcraft. Did not care to elaborate on that. Did not see Allan again until Halloween the year after. For some reason, my brother and I decide that it would be fun to stay at my half-sister's apartment. She rented out the basement in the old family house. Naturally, Allan was there. My brother and I feigned interest and belief in the things he was saying. Actually, the interest was real, but we did not believe a word of it. Apparently trusting us now, he divulged to us some truths. He tells us he is a 7th degree Freemason, maybe higher, I don't really remember, and that he was personally recruited by one of the nation's highest ranking Masons. He tells us that he is a wizard and that he and my half-sister have made contact with the mothership and that when shit goes down, they will be accepted onto the ship. The whole time he's talking, he is stuttering and tapping his feet, occasionally getting up and pacing back and forth. Then he gets weird, tells me a story from years back. He has been wandering the country for years after leaving his abusive family home and had wound up in the maritime provinces. Yes, Leaf. He managed to get a girlfriend and a job at a grocery store. The manager there was a creep, would constantly stare at his girlfriend, catcall her, tap her ass. Real scumbag, if you care to believe what he says. He tries his best to look dangerous and explain to us that he rarely ever used dark magic, but this was an exception. Tells us how one day he'd had enough and Junkie shuffled his way back into his apartment, which he shared with multiple people. Everyone nopes out of the apartment once he walks in, because he had the look in his eyes, the wizard's look. He takes his girlfriend's lipstick and starts scrawling symbols in the bathroom mirror, takes his athame, which he carries 24/7 to cut the veil, and then performs a summoning. Chants a few magic words, and then he says that fucking skeletons jitterbugged out the mirror and flew out of the house. He's dead fucking serious. I can barely keep a straight face. But where did the skeletal conga line go? Into his manager's dreams, apparently. He tells us that, for several nights, the skeletons infested the man's dreams and caused nightmares of them assaulting his daughter, Hal, and calling him an asshole. How does he know what his manager dreamed? The skeletons told him. Allan lets this go on for a few more days, and then confronts his manager, telling him what he's done. His manager promises to stop creeping on his girlfriend if only he'll call off the bony bunch. He wipes off the symbols on the mirror and recalls the skeletons. Needless to say, Halloween was weird, but Allan kept us entertained the whole time. A few notes about Allan. He and my half-sister order light bulbs off of Amazon that are filled with some unknown powder. They break these bulbs and snort what's inside. Apparently it's some sort of psychedelic. Allan draws hentai in crayon. It's horrible. I am not going into detail. He has a whole sketchbook filled with those. It would be another few months before I would hear about Allan again. Consider what comes next, a cautionary tale about snorting mystery powders. It's summer last year. My brother has been staying at my grandparents' so he can be closer to uni. He tells me they've had a visitor. Allan's mind had completely snapped, and he lost all touch with reality. He could walk where directed and repeat a few simple words. He was very fond of saying helicopter. He also lost control of his bowels and had been blasting constant ass for several days. My half-sister, being a junkie herself and bipolar, took several days to do anything about this. Somehow and for some reason, she took Allan up to my grandparents' house and dumped him there. My nana is Christian and accepting of all people of all types. My papa is an 80-year-old native man who hates drug addicts. Naturally, he did not stay long, and after a few days, my papa drives him back to my half-sisters. Allan's condition has not improved. My papa loves country. It's all that he listens to. Allan is capable of recognizing certain patterns and repeating words that he associates with those patterns. Allan recognizes country. The constant movement of the car has awoken the beat of his bowels. He begins to shout very loudly, "Yee-haw, ride 'em, cowboy," and shitting himself profusely. He slaps his knees to the beat of Johnny Cash and shits himself with every strum of the guitar. My papa is furious and begins yelling as well, a tirade against the failures of modern society and perversions of the addict. My brother is riding shotgun and was a first-hand witness to all of this. The shitting, yelling, and country cliches last all the way back to the apartment. Whilst my brother was recounting what happened, I realized I had actually met Allan several years earlier than that fateful Thanksgiving. My dad and I were at a small plaza in town, getting pizza. While waiting for the food to be done, I decided to check out a hawk shop that was on the same strip. I find an old copy of Half-Life 2 and decide to purchase it. There is a surprisingly long line, and the man in front of me is around 6'3". He turns around and looks at me. He has long, greasy hair, pale blue eyes, several missing teeth, and is wearing a trench coat, despite the 27 degrees Celsius heat. Behind me, on a shelf, is a copy of World of Warcraft, Cataclysm. "Have you played World of Warcraft?" he asked me, in a high, raspy voice. Around his neck is a hemp necklace with a pentagram hanging off it. "No," I say. He then proceeds to talk to me about World of Warcraft, a game I have never played, for the entire duration of my wait in line. He only stopped after I had made my purchase. "Okay, see ya, man," he says. "Yeah, see ya." I walk back to my dad's truck. He has 2 large pizzas in the back seat. I tell him about the man I met in the hawk shop. "Heh, crackheads," he says, and we both laugh. a twist of fate, an act of God, or just one more meaningless coincidence. I could never have known that I would actually see that man again, for, obviously, he was Allan. Allan has been doing much better lately. He's on methadone and has regained control over what's left of his mind. One more thing. At some point, I found myself stuck at my half-sister's for several hours. Allan decided to recount his whole tragic life. Again, I'd heard it all before, and I've told all the interesting bits above, but I could not find a place to add this one detail. It's very short. He told me again how he prefers not to use his powers for evil. This time, he had a different story. All he said was that he had once summoned dark energy to cause a pedophile to die in a car crash. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask him to. Grew up in Arizona desert. People don't realize how weird shit gets out here. Friends and I would camp out there, and guaranteed we'd hear at least a few weird things or see some stuff. Don't want to say we got used to it, but we were not used to it at the same time. Have a ton of stories, but this one fits the Fred theme. Anyway, sometime in early high school, we decided to go out and camp during the long weekend. Parents are all used to it, don't really care. Pack up and hike out into friends' property, which is massive. Get to our usual camping spot and notice it's all trashed. Not like litter, but the shit itself looks like a tornado went through it. Figure maybe it was a big dust devil. There is weird scorch marks in the dirt. Pieces of rock, almost like melted together. We figure it must have been big fireworks. There's kind of a weird smell in the air, but it is easily ignored. We decide to stay. Rebuild the fire pit. Everything is fine until the sun goes down. Then we start hearing things. Sounds like a really raspy mumbling. None of us have heard anything like it before, so we're all kind of on alert. Sound is getting closer. Seems to be moving in a circle around camp. None of us are armed, but one of us has a hunting knife. Doesn't really make us feel safer though. Way too dark to hike back. We are basically stuck out here. Over the course of about an hour, the sound fades and gets louder randomly. The more we listen to it, the more we start thinking it's not really chanting. It's more like that weird humming sound power lines make. Starts to smell like hot sand. Friend with the knife is convinced we're gonna get abducted by aliens or something. Starts freaking out and throwing flaming pieces of wood out into the dark. We are telling him he's an idiot and that it's probably just some weird animal. Then one of the pieces hits something about 50 yards away. Get a brief glimpse of something rust-colored and almost the texture of steel wool. Had that same kind of loopy ribbon look, if that makes sense. Whatever it is definitely not a human or animal. We all start chucking pieces of living stuff at it. It doesn't seem to care. Eventually there's enough debris that we can get a better look at it. It was like a squarish stick figure, kind of like those cockapelli things, but without the hair. It's made of this shifting, rusted wire-looking material. It's letting out this weird humming sound. The ground it touches starts to burn and scorch. Circles the camp a few times, like it wants to come closer, but doesn't want to get close to the light. We are all peeing ourselves, thinking we're about to die. Suddenly, it lets out this really loud, metallic shriek, and fucking flies backwards like it's rocket-powered. Everyone flips shit. We leave the gear, and sprint all the way back to the car. Peel out. Come back for our stuff like a week later. Most of it is burnt. Never camp there, ever again. I don't have one, but I guarantee I am someone's creepiest experience. Me and friend, age 17, get drunk and call his bro who's at uni 200 miles away and having a huge weekend-long party and also wasted. Convinces us to hitch out to him at 11 p.m. We decide it's a good idea, hitch a ride with a trucker who has to drop us off about 40 miles into the journey. It starts storming really badly. We are soaked to the bone within 5 minutes. Desperately try to set up a tent. Only piece of flat land nearby is a dividing V shape of grass where the road forks. Pitch tent. Ends up being inside out, or we messed up the waterproof layer, or something. The rain drips through. Somehow managed to fall asleep for a couple of hours. Wake up freezing. Literally have to peel ourselves off a thin layer of ice that is formed. Super cold now. We decide we need to walk to shelter or die. Find a phone box by the road after 10 minutes. Walk and call for a taxi. Only nearby taxi says fuck you, it's 4 a.m. I'll come pick you up at 6 a.m. Feels like hours have passed. We're huddled in the phone box that must have been unused for years. Feel things landing on our heads. Realize it's huge ass spiders all over the phone box. Too cold and wet to do anything about it. Eventually a car pulls in next to the phone box. Fuck yes, taxi. Waddle over at like 2 miles per hour, like pale drowned men. Tri-door of car. Driver looks up from his phone with the most terrified expression I have ever seen on a human in real life. Slaps the lock and fucking floors it out of there. Takes us like 20 seconds to realize it was not our taxi, but some random dude pulling over to text in the middle of nowhere at what must have been 5 a.m. The lulls it provides us keeps us going until taxi finally arrives.